At 6:58 p.m., inside the golden-lit lobby of Aurelio's, the city's most exclusive restaurant, conversation stalled as Veronica Hayes stumbled through the revolving door. Mud streaked across her dress, hair soaked, breath unsteady. The maitre d' stiffened, whispering, "Miss, I'm afraid," but she lifted her chin, voice shaking yet firm. "Reservation under Mitchell." From across the room, Brandon Mitchell turned at the sound of his name. His tailored suit belonged to a world that never touched dirt. Veronica, in that moment, looked like she had walked through a storm meant to break her. He approached, slow and deliberate, eyes scanning the mud dripping onto the marble. "Tell me why," he said quietly, tension tightening every word. "You showed up to a place like this, looking like that." Veronica's fingers dug into her ruined purse. She met his stare, fear, exhaustion, and something fiercely human flickering beneath it. "Because someone needed me," she whispered. "And I couldn't walk away." A hush spread through the room. Even Brandon didn't breathe. What she reveals next will decide whether he leaves. Or everything changes. If this opening pulls you in, like and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales for the full story. The moment Veronica stepped deeper into Aurelio's, the soft glow of chandelier light shifted across the polished floors, highlighting every muddy step she left behind. Brandon watched her closely, but before he could ask anything else, the maitre d', a tall man named Louis Carver, cut sharply between them. His voice carried an edge sharpened by years of catering to the wealthy. "Mr. Mitchell, sir, if you prefer, we can escort this woman outside while we prepare a more appropriate seating arrangement." His eyes never once hid what he meant. "She doesn't belong here." Veronica stiffened. Brandon's jaw flexed, but he held his response, waiting for her to speak. She met Louis's gaze, steady and unflinching, even as whispers grew behind her. "Someone needed help," she said quietly. "That's why I look like this." Louis scoffed, loud enough for the room to hear. "People like you always need a story." He gestured toward the door. "I'm sure Mr. Mitchell wants dignity with his dinner." Brandon's expression shifted, confusion giving way to something colder, protective, but Veronica lifted a hand gently, stopping him. She wasn't afraid of Louis. He was simply another doorway she'd been told she didn't deserve to walk through. What rattled her more was the murmur of diners, some amused, some disgusted, a few recording discreetly. She didn't want an audience, but the night had already chosen one. Brandon moved first. "She stays," he said, voice deep, decisive. "And we'll be seated now." Louis inhaled as if swallowing his outrage. "Very well, sir. But she cannot enter the dining hall in this condition. It violates." Brandon cut him off. "Then bring towels. Or a tablecloth. Figure it out." But Louis stepped closer to Veronica instead. "Or perhaps," he said softly, with venom curling beneath each syllable, "she could go around back. The service entrance suits her better." The air tightened. Even the clinking of glasses paused. Veronica didn't cry. She had spent years hearing versions of that sentence. At work, on buses, in stores where she was watched more than welcomed. But tonight something cracked. Not in defeat but in defiance. She faced Louis fully. "Do you talk to all women this way?" she asked. "Or only the ones you think can't fight back?" Gasps rippled across the room. Brandon stepped beside her, shoulders squared. "Louis," he said, "this conversation is over. Seat us. Now." But Louis, emboldened by the attention, smirked. "Sir, I am protecting the prestige of this establishment. Your reputation. This situation draws the wrong kind of eyes." Veronica's voice softened, but it held steel. "The wrong kind of eyes are the ones that refuse to see people." Brandon turned to her, and for the first time since meeting him, she saw something raw in his expression. A mix of shame and admiration, as if he was realizing how many rooms like this he had walked into without noticing who they stepped over. But before he could respond, Veronica swayed. The weight of the day, the cold ditch water, the fear, the climb, the sprint to the restaurant, pressed down hard. Brandon caught her arm. "You need to sit." Louis seized the moment. "I'll call security," he declared. This has gone far enough. No, Brandon said sharply. What's gone far enough is your behavior. Louis ignored him and reached for his radio. That was when Veronica spoke again, calmly but with fire beneath her words. Before you do that, maybe you should know the truth. She straightened, exhaustion giving way to clarity. A little boy almost drowned tonight. I climbed into a 12-foot ditch to drag him out. While you were polishing silverware and judging strangers, I was holding a child who thought he was taking his last breath. Silence swept the room. The weight of what she said settled like dust after an explosion. Louis faltered, lowering the radio. You expect us to believe that? Brandon stepped forward. I believe her. But Louis wasn't done. Pride was his shield, and cruelty his habit. Stories, he repeated. People like her always bring stories. It's how they survive. Something inside Veronica tightened, an ache she recognized from every door slammed in her face when she advocated for families at work, every mother who'd been dismissed because her accent was wrong or her clothes too worn. She looked directly at Louis, and her voice didn't tremble this time. I survived because I acted, she said. A child is alive because I didn't hesitate. What did you do today that mattered? The room erupted, not in sound but in emotion. Every diner now fully watching. And Louis, red-faced, finally stepped back. Brandon exhaled. Enough. We're leaving. He guided Veronica toward the exit, but before they reached the door, a woman rose from a nearby table. Miss, she said softly, is the boy safe? Veronica nodded. Yes, he's safe. Warmth flickered through the woman's eyes, and she clapped gently. Others joined, slow but sincere. Not pity, respect. Louis stood frozen, exposed in his cruelty, overshadowed by the courage of the woman he tried to belittle. Outside, the rain had softened into mist. Brandon opened the car door for Veronica, then paused. I'm sorry, he said. For what he said. For what this place represents sometimes. Veronica stared ahead, rain glistening on the streetlights. People like him remind me why kindness feels like rebellion. Brandon let the words settle. They drove in silence until they reached the penthouse, where warmth, light, and quiet finally wrapped around her. But even there, the heaviness lingered. Later that night, while Veronica showered, Brandon paced the living room. He replayed everything, the humiliation she endured, the arrogance in Louis's voice, the way she stood despite exhaustion. He realized he had the power to change the narrative not just for her but for others like her. And he intended to. The next morning, Aurelio's woke to a storm, not of weather but of consequence. Several diners had filmed Louis's behavior. Videos spread online in hours. Headlines appeared. Restaurant manager mocks woman who saved a child. Billionaire witnesses classist outburst, speaks out. Brandon didn't stay silent. In a brief interview outside his office building he stated clearly, what I saw last night was unacceptable. Kindness and courage should be honored, not insulted. By noon, petitions called for Louis's termination. By evening, Aurelio's issued a public apology. But the final blow came when corporate headquarters announced Louis was officially dismissed for discriminatory conduct and public misconduct. Veronica read the news on her phone, hands trembling, not from joy in someone else's downfall, but relief that truth had, for once, been louder than power. Her phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. Dinner tonight? No fancy restaurants. Just us. Somewhere you choose. She smiled, the tension of the past 24 hours finally loosening. For the first time in a long while she felt seen. And not because she saved a life or stood against a bully, but because someone finally recognized the strength she carried every day. Outside her window, the city glowed, alive, imperfect, but full of people who sometimes did the right thing. And somewhere across town, Louis Carver walked out of Aurelio's for the final time, stripped of the authority he used to belittle others, forced to face the reality he tried so hard to bury. The world did not end for him, but it changed, and for once, not in his favor. And that was only the beginning. Because what happens next will flip everything they thought they knew about power, justice, and the quiet strength of the people they overlooked. In the days that followed, Veronica noticed something she hadn't felt in a long time: quiet strength rising from places she once thought were empty. People she'd never met reached out with gratitude, not because they knew her story, but because they recognized themselves in it. Brandon saw it too, watching how she moved through the world with a kind of honesty that didn't demand attention, yet changed every room that let her in. One evening, as the city lights shimmered across the river, he asked her what she wanted now that the noise had settled. She didn't hesitate. "To keep choosing courage," she said, "even when no one's watching." Brandon smiled, not out of admiration but understanding. He had learned something from her: how truth, spoken without force, can still break walls that power never could. And somehow, the world around them looked a little less unkind because of it. Later that night, Veronica stepped onto her small balcony. The air was cool, the streets below steady and alive, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her choices lift like a curtain opening. A single drop of rain landed on her hand, warm from the city lights, and she let it stay there, proof that even the smallest moments could carry something whole. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales so we can continue bringing meaningful journeys to life.